Today's video is a detailed review and analysis of the movie Rampage, starring Dwayne Johnson. This is not a full movie and not a movie screening. In this video, we will break down the complete story of the film and explain how the plot develops from start to end. We will talk about the main cast and supporting cast, their roles, and their performances. We will also cover the movie's production, development process, and the creative choices behind it. You will learn where the story was inspired from, who wrote it, and what the original idea and purpose were. Along with the creative side, we will analyze the movie's budget, box office performance, and overall business results. Every important element of the film is explained and reviewed from a viewer's perspective. So let's begin and take a closer look at Rampage. The film opens far above the Earth, inside a sleek orbiting laboratory called Athena-1, owned by the shadowy genetics corporation, Energene. At first, everything looks sterile and controlled, the kind of place where science believes it has complete authority over nature. White corridors glow under artificial light, computer screens pulse with streams of genetic code, and outside the windows the planet hangs silently in the darkness. Then something goes terribly wrong. A laboratory rat begins to mutate. At first it is subtle, a tremor, a twitch of muscle that seems unnatural. Within seconds it becomes something horrifying. Its body expands, its teeth elongate, its eyes burn with a feral intelligence that no ordinary creature should possess. The station erupts into chaos. Alarms scream, doors slam shut. The camera races through the corridors as the mutated animal tears through equipment and scientists alike. Director Peyton stages the sequence like a horror film unfolding in zero gravity, letting the audience feel the panic before they even understand what this pathogen is capable of. One terrified scientist, Carrie Atkins, realizes the station is doomed. She manages to escape in a pod, carrying 3 canisters of the experimental pathogen that started the disaster. But survival never comes. As the escape pod re-enters the atmosphere, it disintegrates violently, scattering the canisters across the American wilderness. This moment sets the tone of the entire story. Science has unleashed something that can no longer be controlled, and now the Earth itself will suffer the consequences. The film then shifts thousands of miles away to the quiet natural environment of the San Diego Zoo Safari Park, where we meet primatologist Davis Okoye. Dwayne Johnson plays Davis with a calm physical presence that contrasts sharply with the chaos of the opening sequence. Davis is not introduced as a typical action hero, but as a man who understands animals better than people. His history as a former Special Forces soldier and anti-poaching operative lingers quietly in his demeanor, but here he prefers silence and observation. His closest companion is a rare leucistic western lowland gorilla named George. Their relationship is the emotional core of the story. George is enormous even before the mutation, but he behaves with curiosity and humor rather than aggression. Using sign language, Davis communicates with him like an old friend. The scenes between them are filmed with surprising warmth. Motion capture performer Jason Lyles brings George to life with subtle gestures that make the animal feel intelligent and playful. George teases Davis, mimics human behavior, and even laughs in his own gorilla way. It is clear that Davis does not see him as a specimen. He sees him as family. The peaceful atmosphere does not last long. One of the pathogen canisters from the destroyed space station crashes directly into George's habitat during the night. The container shatters, releasing a strange glowing substance that spreads into the air like toxic pollen. George inhales it without realizing the danger. From that moment, the story begins moving toward catastrophe. The next morning, Davis notices something strange. George is larger. His muscles appear denser, his eyes sharper, his temper shorter. The change is subtle at first, but deeply unsettling. The film slowly builds tension through these observations, letting the audience understand that something inside George is rewriting his biology at an accelerating pace. Meanwhile, the other 2 canisters have already infected animals elsewhere in the United States. In the forests of Wyoming, a wolf becomes something monstrous, its body growing to impossible proportions, while its intelligence becomes predatory and ruthless. In the swamps of the Everglades, a massive American crocodile absorbs the pathogen, turning into a prehistoric nightmare lurking beneath dark water. These parallel transformations establish the true scale of the threat. The pathogen is not simply mutating animals. It is enhancing them beyond natural limits. Genetic engineer Kate Caldwell soon arrives, portrayed by Naomi Harris, with urgency and guilt. She explains that the pathogen was designed to manipulate DNA on a massive scale, originally intended for revolutionary medical breakthroughs within the field of genetic engineering. but the company behind it twisted the research into a weapon capable of altering living organisms into living bioweapons. Kate herself helped create the technology before realizing the corporation's darker intentions. Her regret runs deep. She believes the pathogen could theoretically be reversed with an antidote, but only if they can reach George before his transformation becomes irreversible. By this point, George has already begun losing control. His strength multiplies. His frustration becomes violent. When authorities arrive to capture him, the situation spirals out of control. George escapes containment, smashing through reinforced barriers and sending vehicles flying like toys. Yet in the middle of the destruction, Davis still manages to calm him with familiar gestures. The moment is heartbreaking because it shows the creature fighting against the mutation inside his own body. Soon, a government team led by the mysterious agent Harvey Russell arrives to secure the situation. Jeffrey Dean Morgan plays Russell with a dry sense of humor and a slightly unpredictable attitude, as if he knows more about the situation than he initially reveals. George is finally sedated and transported aboard a military aircraft, but even this attempt at control cannot last. The pathogen is still evolving inside him, making him stronger with every passing minute. High above the landscape, the plane becomes the stage for another disaster. George awakens mid-flight, now vastly larger and far more aggressive than before. The aircraft shakes violently as he breaks free from his restraints. Metal tears apart like paper. The tension inside the cabin becomes unbearable as Davis realizes the friend he once knew is slowly disappearing under the weight of genetic chaos. What follows is one of the film's most explosive sequences. George smashes through the aircraft, sending debris raining across the sky, while Davis, Kate, and Russell struggle to escape before the plane crashes. The destruction echoes the opening catastrophe in space, reinforcing the central theme of the movie. Humanity believed it could manipulate nature safely. Instead, it created something unstoppable. As the aircraft plummets toward the ground and George leaps into the wilderness below, the story begins, accelerating toward a much larger disaster waiting far ahead in the city of Chicago, where the true masterminds behind this genetic experiment are preparing a signal that will call every mutated creature directly toward the heart of civilization. The plane's wreckage burns across the wilderness like a scar carved into the earth. Twisted metal scattered across miles of forest while smoke spirals into the sky. The silence that follows feels heavy, as if nature itself is stunned by what has just happened. Davis Okoye pulls himself from the wreckage with bruised ribs and a ringing in his ears, but his mind is somewhere else entirely. He is searching the horizon for George. The creature that once joked with him through sign language is now something unpredictable, something powerful enough to bring down a military aircraft in seconds. Nearby, geneticist Kate Caldwell regains her footing as well, her expression torn between scientific fascination and deep regret. She knows better than anyone what the pathogen is capable of doing. It was designed to rewrite DNA at a speed that nature never intended. Instead of evolution unfolding across millions of years, this chemical forces change within hours. Bones grow denser, muscles expand, instincts sharpen into aggression. What was meant to cure diseases has become the perfect blueprint for biological warfare. Davis struggles with the emotional reality of it. For years he built trust with George, teaching him gestures, learning the subtle moods behind the gorilla's expressions, understanding him in a way few humans ever could. Now he fears that friendship is being erased, cell by cell. Before he can search further, government forces surround the crash site. Armored vehicles roll across the dirt, while helicopters circle overhead. The operation is led by the unpredictable federal agent Harvey Russell, a man whose calm attitude suggests he has seen far stranger disasters than this one. Russell is officially working for a secretive branch of the government, often referred to simply as another agency, the kind that appears whenever a crisis involves science gone wrong. Instead of panic, he treats the entire situation like a complicated chess match. While soldiers secure the wreckage, Russell listens to Kate explain the pathogen in more detail. She reveals that the compound does not simply enlarge animals. It enhances every aggressive instinct in their nervous systems and accelerates their sensory perception. Vision sharpens, reflexes increase, even healing speeds up. In other words, the infected creatures are becoming apex predators, beyond anything modern ecosystems are prepared to handle. Meanwhile, far away in a towering glass headquarters in Chicago, the architects of this disaster watch events unfold. With cold calculation, the corporation Energene is run by Claire Wyde, a brilliant but ruthless executive who sees the pathogen not as a mistake but as an opportunity. Malin Akerman portrays Claire with icy confidence, someone who measures success not in morality but in power. Her brother Brett Wyde, far less composed and far more nervous, assists her while trying to ignore the growing evidence that their experiment has spiraled out of control. Together, they observe satellite feeds tracking the mutated animals. The wolf infected in Wyoming has already grown into a colossal predator that hunters have begun calling Ralph. Unlike George, whose intelligence still shows traces of compassion, Ralph behaves purely as a killer. He moves across forests like a living weapon, ambushing anything unfortunate enough to cross his path. Claire understands that these creatures cannot be captured easily, but she also knows something about the pathogen that no one else realizes. Each infected animal responds aggressively to a specific radio frequency embedded in the compound during its design. By broadcasting that signal from a powerful transmitter, she can lure the monsters exactly where she wants them. Her plan is terrifyingly simple. Activate a massive antenna at the top of Chicago's Willis Tower and draw the creatures directly into the city. Once they arrive, the military will destroy them, eliminating the evidence, while Energyne claims the antidote technology as its solution to the crisis. It is a plan that sacrifices thousands of civilians for corporate survival. Back in the wilderness, Davis refuses to give up on George. He believes there is still a part of the animal that remembers him. Kate shares that hope because she knows an antidote exists, though it can only suppress the rage rather than reverse the mutation entirely. Their only chance is to reach George before the military decides the only option is to eliminate him. Their pursuit begins when Russell quietly assists them in stealing a helicopter, suggesting that despite his sarcastic personality, he may actually want them to succeed. As the helicopter rises above forests and rivers, the film begins building toward its true scale. The camera shows the mutated wolf moving relentlessly toward Chicago, drawn by the signal Claire has already activated. At the same time, the crocodile infected in the Florida Everglades emerges from the water. Now a monstrous reptile, larger than any prehistoric fossil ever discovered. Its armored body plows through swamps like a living tank, heading north with unstoppable momentum. These parallel journeys create a sense of approaching catastrophe. Three titanic animals are unknowingly converging on the same destination. When Davis, Kate, and Russell finally reach the outskirts of Chicago, they witness the first signs of chaos. Police sirens echo across highways, while military convoys rush toward the city center. Civilians watch the skyline in confusion as something enormous moves between skyscrapers. George arrives first, climbing through the urban landscape with destructive curiosity. Glass explodes outward from buildings as his massive arms smash through windows. Despite the destruction, there are brief moments where he hesitates, as if fragments of his old personality still flicker beneath the mutation. Davis sees this hesitation from the helicopter and realizes the bond between them may still exist. But the situation escalates quickly when Ralph, the giant wolf, leaps across rooftops and crashes into the city streets, howling with predatory rage. The two creatures confront each other like rival titans in the middle of downtown traffic. Tanks fire shells, helicopters launch missiles. None of it slows them down. Just when it seems the chaos cannot grow any worse, the river beside the city erupts violently as the mutated crocodile bursts from the water. The creature, eventually nicknamed Lizzie by stunned observers, dwarfs even the other monsters. Its armored scales deflect heavy weapons, while its jaws snap through bridges and vehicles alike. Chicago becomes a battlefield of collapsing buildings and panicked evacuations. Through all of this, Davis keeps repeating one belief: George is not the enemy. He is a victim of the same experiment that created the other monsters. If the antidote can reach him, he might still help stop the destruction. As the helicopter circles the skyline and the three beasts clash beneath them, the story reaches a turning point where loyalty between a man and an animal might become the only force capable of preventing an entire city from being erased. The helicopter blades slice through the cold night air as Davis, Kate, and Russell race toward the glowing skyline of Chicago. From above, the city still looks calm in places, but distant flashes of explosions and the echo of sirens reveal that chaos has already begun spreading through the streets. Davis leans forward in his seat, gripping the frame of the helicopter door while staring down at the maze of lights below. Somewhere inside that massive city is George, and every second that passes pushes the creature further away from the friend Davis once knew. Kate studies the tablet in her hands, tracking the signal frequency that continues pulsing from the top of the tower. Her voice carries a mix of fear and guilt as she explains that the broadcast is deliberately designed to provoke aggression in infected animals. Russell glances between them with his usual calm expression, though even he seems aware that the situation is spiraling beyond control. Whatever corporation built this signal knew exactly what they were doing. Far outside the city, the mutated wolf races across the countryside like a living missile, Trees snap and collapse under the weight of its massive body as it charges forward with terrifying speed. The creature is no longer simply an animal. The pathogen has sharpened its senses and amplified its instincts until it behaves more like a calculated hunter than a wild beast. Its glowing eyes fix on the direction of Chicago as the frequency pulls it closer. The signal resonates inside its skull like an irresistible command. Back in the helicopter, Davis finally spots movement among the skyscrapers ahead. A massive shadow climbs the side of a building, tearing through glass and steel like a storm made of muscle and bone. George has reached the city. Traffic clogs the streets below as people abandon their cars and run in panic. Police sirens echo between the buildings, while soldiers attempt to establish barricades around the downtown district. Then George roars. The sound rolls across the city like thunder, rattling windows and sending terrified crowds scrambling for cover. The enormous gorilla stands upright between towers of steel and concrete. For a brief moment, he simply looks around in confusion, as if trying to understand where he is. His enormous chest rises and falls while helicopters circle above him. Davis feels a strange mix of relief and dread. Even at this monstrous size, George still shows signs of the intelligence he once had. His eyes move with curiosity rather than blind rage. But the signal suddenly intensifies. George's body stiffens as the frequency hits him like a shockwave. His muscles tighten, and his expression shifts from confusion to aggression. The creature slams his fist into the side of a nearby building. Glass rains down like glittering snow across the streets as alarms begin blaring through the entire district. Soldiers open fire, their bullets bouncing harmlessly off George's thick hide. The attack only makes things worse. George grabs a military vehicle and hurls it across the street, sending it crashing into a line of abandoned cars. The explosion lights up the dark street like a flash of lightning. Inside the helicopter, Kate watches the destruction with horror. She knows this isn't George's fault. The pathogen has rewritten his instincts, forcing his brain to react violently to the signal Claire White has unleashed. Russell mutters something under his breath while steering the helicopter around a collapsing tower crane. Even he looks impressed by the scale of the disaster unfolding below. But then another roar echoes across the city. This one doesn't belong to George. From the far end of the skyline, something massive leaps across a row of buildings. The shape moves with terrifying speed, smashing through rooftops as it closes the distance. The mutated wolf has arrived. The creature lands in the middle of a crowded intersection, with an impact that cracks the pavement. Dust and debris explode outward as cars are thrown aside like toys. For a moment, the wolf stands still, its enormous body silhouetted against the city lights. Its fur bristles like jagged steel wires, while its eyes glow with predatory focus. Then, it sees George. The two monsters lock eyes across the ruined street. The wolf snarls, revealing rows of enormous teeth designed for tearing through bone. George responds with a thunderous roar of his own. The sound waves crash into nearby buildings like invisible shockwaves. Windows shatter as the two creatures prepare to fight. Davis watches in disbelief from the helicopter. Two titans now stand in the middle of Chicago, and the battle hasn't even started yet. The wolf charges first. It launches itself forward with terrifying speed, slamming into George's chest like a living battering ram. The impact sends the giant gorilla crashing backward into a skyscraper. The entire building trembles as concrete cracks beneath the force. George quickly recovers, grabbing the wolf's massive jaws and pushing the creature away before it can bite into his neck. The two monsters struggle against each other like earthquakes. Given physical form, streetlights collapse. Cars flip through the air. The ground shakes beneath their weight. From the helicopter, Davis sees something strange in George's movements. Despite the rage, George still seems to recognize him. When the gorilla briefly glances toward the helicopter, there is a flicker of familiarity in his eyes. It's enough to give Davis hope. But before he can act on that hope, the river beside the city suddenly erupts. A massive wall of water crashes against the riverbanks as something enormous rises from the depths. At first, the soldiers think it's a submarine. Then, they see the scales. The mutated crocodile surfaces like a prehistoric monster reborn. Its armored body stretches across half the river, easily dwarfing boats and bridges around it. The creature slowly lifts its massive head above the waterline, revealing rows of teeth longer than knives. Panic spreads. Instantly, three monsters are now converging on the same battlefield. The crocodile crawls onto the riverbank with terrifying power, crushing a police cruiser beneath one enormous claw. Its massive tail sweeps across the waterfront, destroying everything in its path. Russell stares at the creature and whistles softly. Even he didn't expect the third mutation to be this large dot. The crocodile lets out a deep rumbling roar that echoes across the entire city. The sound immediately draws the attention of the other two beasts. George turns, the wolf turns, and suddenly all three monsters are facing each other. The battlefield grows silent for a single moment. Then chaos explodes again. The wolf lunges toward George, but the crocodile intercepts the attack with brutal force. Its massive jaws snap shut around the wolf's shoulder, sending the creature crashing into the pavement. George uses the opportunity to slam his fists into the crocodile's armored back. The impact echoes like a cannon. Blast dot, but the reptile barely reacts. Its scales are almost indestructible. Buildings crumble around them as the three titans tear through the city in a fight that looks more like a natural disaster than a battle. Helicopters retreat to safer distances. Missiles streak through the sky as the military attempts to contain the situation. But nothing seems capable of stopping the monsters. Inside the helicopter, Kate realizes something terrifying. If the signal keeps broadcasting, the creatures will never calm down. They will keep fighting until the entire city is destroyed. Davis finally makes a decision. He looks at Kate and says, they need to shut down the transmitter at the top of the tower. That signal is the only thing pushing George beyond control. If they can stop it, maybe George will remember who he is. Russell smirks slightly as he turns the helicopter toward the tallest building in the city. Because if they're going to shut down that signal, they're going to have to fly straight into the heart of the war zone. Blood spreads across Davis's shirt as he struggles to push himself back up from the floor. The pain hits hard, sharp and immediate, but it barely registers compared to the fear in his eyes. He is not looking at the wound. He is looking past Claire, past the broken glass walls, toward the skyline where George has suddenly stopped fighting and turned his head toward the tower, as if some buried instinct inside him has recognized that something is wrong. Kate drops to her knees beside Davis for half a second, pressing a hand against the wound before forcing herself back toward the console. She knows that if she stops now, if she lets fear take over, then everything outside will collapse. The transmitter is still active, still dragging rage through every nerve of those giant animals. Claire rises from behind the console with the cold patience of someone who has already justified every death in her mind. Her red hair is slightly disheveled now, but her confidence remains intact. To her, the destruction outside is not tragedy. It is data. Russell moves across the room with that same loose swagger he always carries, but now it is sharpened by urgency. He fires a burst toward Claire's guards and sends them ducking behind overturned equipment. Sparks shower from the wall as bullets rip through control panels. Davis forces himself to stand. It is messy and painful and unsteady, but he gets up anyway. Claire notices and smiles as if she almost admires it. She tells him he should stay down, that the city outside is already lost, that George and the others were always going to end this way. In her voice there is no hatred. That is what makes her terrifying. Hatred would at least imply emotion. Claire sounds clinical. Davis answers through clenched teeth that she does not know George. The city outside shudders again as the crocodile crashes into the side of a high-rise and tears away a section of the building. Concrete and steel rain into the avenue below. Sirens fade beneath the much larger language of roaring monsters and collapsing glass. George begins climbing. His enormous hands slam into the side of the tower, cracking its outer shell as he hauls himself upward. The signal is still tearing at his brain, still pushing him toward aggression. But now something else is pulling him too. Something older than the mutation. Trust. Inside the control room, Kate finally gains access to the transmitter interface. Streams of data flood across the screen. Enegine built layers of security into the system, and every second she spends breaking through them feels stolen from the city below. Russell glances toward her and understands instantly. He shifts his position and draws more fire away from the console, knocking over a bank of monitors and sending smoke curling into the room. He is still half joking under his breath, still wearing that expression that suggests he enjoys impossible situations more than he should. But now there is something else there too. Respect. Claire backs toward a side corridor, pulling Kate with her at gunpoint the moment she sees the console nearly compromised. The movement is fast and cruel. One hand grips the weapon. The other seizes Kate by the arm and drags her away from the controls before the shutdown command can be completed. Davis lunges forward, despite the pain ripping through his side, but he is too late. Claire presses the barrel of the gun against Kate's neck and retreats toward the emergency elevator, using her as a shield. Her face is still composed, but now cracks of desperation are starting to show. She no longer looks like a corporate queen watching her plan unfold. She looks like someone trying to outrun the consequences of her own arrogance. Outside, George climbs higher. His fingers punch into steel beams hidden beneath the building's outer frame. Each pull upward sends vibrations through the tower. The The city below watches in a kind of horrified disbelief as a giant white gorilla scales one of the tallest buildings in America with the speed of an avalanche moving uphill. The mutated wolf bursts from a cloud of dust several blocks away, bloodied but far from beaten. It tilts its head upward and sees George climbing. Instantly, it begins racing toward the tower, leaping over ruined intersections and through burning wreckage with terrifying agility. Lizzie, the crocodile, follows in a slower but even more devastating path, bulldozing through vehicles and barricades as if the city were made of cardboard. Davis stumbles after Claire, his hand pressed against his wound. Russell catches up beside him and for the first time drops the humor entirely. He tells Davis to stay upright just a little longer. The way he says it makes it sound less like encouragement and more like an order from someone who has seen enough men die to recognize the moment it begins. Kate, still being dragged toward the elevator, manages to reach into her pocket and feel the antidote vial still there. It is a small thing, absurdly small compared to the destruction outside, yet it might be the only thing separating George from total madness. Claire keeps talking as they move. She talks the way some people do when silence would force them to hear themselves clearly. She explains that the antidote will not reverse the mutation, only suppress the aggression. She almost sounds disappointed by that limitation, as if keeping the creatures monstrous but manageable would have been the ideal business model. Brett suddenly appears at the far end of the corridor, pale and shaking, holding a bag full of stolen drives and evidence. He looks nothing like a partner in corporate genocide now. He looks like a child who realizes the house he set on fire is larger than he imagined. Russell intercepts him before he can flee and tears the bag from his grip. The hard drives spill into his hands, full of proof of Energen's experiments, cover-ups, and illegal weaponization of genetic research. Russell gives Brett a look that says he has already judged him. Then he lets him go. For a moment it seems insane, but Russell knows something Brett does not. Men like Brett never survive chaos. They mistake escape for salvation. The building shakes violently again. George has reached the upper levels. His massive hand crashes through the side of the tower, ripping open the wall as if peeling back paper. Wind and dust explode through the shattered opening. Claire turns just in time to see a huge white face forcing itself toward the room, eyes burning with a war between rage and recognition. This is the moment the film has been building toward. Not just monster against villain. Not just science against nature. Friendship against corruption. Claire screams for George to attack Davis, still believing the creature is nothing more than a weapon tuned by frequency. She does not understand that there is another signal inside him, one that never came from Energen memory. Kate twists free just enough to slip the antidote vial into Claire's handbag. The motion is small, almost invisible in the chaos. Then she shoves Claire forward. It happens in one terrible instant. Claire stumbles toward the opening, toward George, still clutching the bag. George's jaws snap shut around her before she can even finish screaming. The handbag disappears with her. The antidote goes down to... The room falls silent for a fraction of a second. Then George freezes. Outside the tower, the wolf is still charging closer. Lizzie is still tearing through downtown. The signal continues to pulse from the transmitter. But inside George, something shifts. His eyes change first. The wild frenzy softens. Not completely, not all at once, but enough that Davis sees it and knows. George blinks, confused, almost ashamed, like someone waking up after being trapped inside a nightmare they could not control. Davis takes a step forward. He is bleeding heavily now, pale from blood loss, but he lifts one trembling hand and signs to George. Slow, familiar, not command, not fear, trust. George stares at him. Then, slowly, he signs back. It is clumsy, because of his size and the damage around them, but unmistakable. Friend. The emotional weight of that moment cuts through the noise of the whole movie. For all the collapsing buildings and giant monsters and explosions, the story has always lived inside that bond. A man and an animal finding each other again in the middle of a war neither of them chose. But the city does not stop for reunions. The wolf slams into the side of the tower below, shaking the entire structure. Alarms howl. Support columns buckle. The building begins to tilt, not dramatically at first, but enough for everyone inside to feel it. Kate regains the transmitter controls just long enough to shut the signal down. Across the city, the frequency dies. The immediate effect is chaos of a different kind. The monsters are no longer being driven by that artificial rage, but the damage is already in motion. The wolf and the crocodile are still here, still enormous, still deadly. The tower groans like a dying thing. Russell looks around once and knows exactly what is happening. There is no saving the building now. He shouts for everyone to move. Davis and Kate race toward the emergency helipad access, while George tears open another section of the tower to create a path out. Behind them, floors begin collapsing, one into another. Fire blooms upward through shattered windows. Brett, meanwhile, finally reaches the outside of the building with his bag gone and his nerves shattered. He runs into the open street beneath the collapsing tower. Looking up just long enough to realize that escape is a joke, the universe tells before it crushes you. Falling debris comes down in a violent rain of steel and concrete, and buries him instantly. Above, Davis, Kate, and Russell reach the helicopter platform, just as the tower lurches harder. The angle of the skyline suddenly feels wrong. The city itself seems to be tipping. George hangs to the side of the structure, half climbing, half holding it together through sheer force. The image is surreal. A giant white gorilla clinging to a dying skyscraper, while helicopters burn in the distance and Chicago falls apart below. Kate gets the helicopter started with shaking hands. Russell helps drag Davis inside. The tower begins its final collapse, and as the upper floors fold and drop, as glass and fire spill into the night, George leaps away from the crumbling mass, while the helicopter drops hard into open air, barely clearing the destruction as the whole top of the tower comes down behind them like the end of a world. Inside the helicopter, Kate struggles to stabilize the controls. The rotor blades scream as the aircraft fights through turbulent air created by the falling skyscraper. Russell grips the side rail, while Davis tries to remain conscious despite the blood soaking through his shirt. Below them, the city looks almost unrecognizable now. Streets are filled with wreckage, bridges are broken, and fires burn across several blocks. Emergency vehicles move like tiny insects between the ruins, while thousands of civilians try to escape the destruction. George lands heavily on the streets several blocks away from the collapsing tower. The impact shakes nearby buildings. But this time, the giant gorilla does not roar in rage. Instead, he looks around slowly, confused. The antidote moving through his system has calmed the violent impulses that the transmitter signal forced into his mind. He is still enormous and powerful, but the wild fury that once controlled him is fading. Unfortunately, the other monsters have not received the same treatment. Across the ruined avenue, the giant wolf emerges from a cloud of dust and twisted steel. Its body is covered with scars from the battle, yet its eyes remain filled with pure, predatory focus. Unlike George, the wolf never had a human connection to anchor it. The mutation only amplified what it already was: a hunter. The wolf lifts its head and releases a terrifying howl that echoes through the empty streets. The sound carries across the city like a signal of war. A moment later, the ground begins shaking again. From the river, the massive crocodile crawls back onto the shore. Lizzie's armored body is scratched and bloodied from the earlier fight, but the creature still moves with unstoppable strength. Each step cracks the pavement beneath its claws. The helicopter circles lower as Davis looks down at George standing alone between the two monsters. His face tightens with fear because he understands what is about to happen. George may have regained control of his mind, but the other two creatures are still driven by instinct, and they are both looking at him. Kate realizes the same thing, and immediately begins speaking with the military command channel. Fighter jets are already moving into position above the city. The plan is simple and terrifying. If the monsters cannot be contained, the military will launch a massive bomb to eliminate them completely. Russell listens to the conversation and mutters that the solution sounds exactly like something the government would choose. Davis interrupts them before the call can continue. His voice is weak but determined as he insists that George still has a chance. George is not like the other creatures, he understands. Below them, the wolf begins moving toward George with slow, calculated steps. The predator circles the massive gorilla while searching for weakness. George watches it carefully. There is no rage in his expression now, only awareness. The wolf suddenly charges. It leaps forward with explosive speed, its enormous jaws snapping toward George's throat. George reacts instantly, grabbing the creature by the shoulders before it can bite down. The two titans crash into a row of abandoned cars, sending metal flying across the street like shattered toys. The fight begins again, but this time George is thinking. He pushes the wolf away and throws a powerful punch into its chest. The blow launches the creature through the wall of a nearby building. Dust explodes outward from the impact as the wolf disappears into the structure. George barely has time to recover before Lizzie lunges from the side. The crocodile's enormous jaws slam shut around George's arm. The sound echoes like a steel trap, snapping closed. For a moment, it looks as if the reptile might rip the gorilla apart. George roars in pain and slams his free fist into the crocodile's head again and again. Each blow lands like a hammer strike against living armor, but Lizzie's scales are incredibly tough. The reptile refuses to release its grip. From the helicopter, Davis watches helplessly. His hands grip the seat as he fights the urge to jump out and somehow help. Kate reminds him that George is stronger than he thinks. George finally manages to pull his trapped arm free, tearing a section of the crocodile's jaw scales in the process. The reptile recoils slightly before charging forward again with even greater fury. The wolf suddenly bursts back into the street from the collapsed building. The creature leaps onto George's back and sinks its claws into the gorilla's shoulders. The attack drives George to his knees as both monsters assault him at the same time. The scene below becomes a whirlwind of destruction. George struggles to stand while the wolf bites into his back, and the crocodile lunges repeatedly at his legs. Buildings collapse around them as the three giants tear through the city. Inside the helicopter, Russell shakes his head in disbelief. He has seen wars, disasters, and covert operations, but nothing close to this. Davis suddenly notices something lying near the wreckage of a destroyed construction site. A long steel rebar rod sticking out from a pile of broken concrete. He quickly points it out to Kate. Below them, George manages to grab the wolf and slam it against the street, hard enough to create a crater in the asphalt. The wolf staggers back, but quickly recovers. Lizzie takes advantage of the distraction and slams her massive tail into George's side. The blow launches the giant gorilla across an entire intersection. George crashes through the remains of a bus and lands near the construction site Davis noticed. For a moment, the gorilla lies still. The wolf approaches cautiously. Lizzie slowly crawls forward behind it, jaws opening wider with each step. The helicopter descends slightly as Davis watches the scene unfold. He whispers George's name under his breath, hoping somehow the creature can hear him. George finally moves. Slowly he reaches down and grips the steel rebar rod sticking out of the concrete. The wolf charges again, but this time George is ready. He swings the metal rod with incredible force, smashing it into the wolf's skull. The impact sends the predator sliding across the pavement like a ragdoll. Before the wolf can recover, Lizzie lunges forward with her jaws wide open. George steps aside at the last possible second. The crocodile's momentum carries it straight into the wolf. Its massive jaws snap shut around the predator's head. There is a sickening crunch. The wolf's body collapses instantly as Lizzie tears the creature apart with one violent bite. For a moment, the battlefield goes silent again. Only two monsters remain now. George and the crocodile stare at each other across the ruined street. The crocodile charges forward with terrifying force, its enormous body tearing through the ruined street like a moving tank. Every step cracks the asphalt beneath its claws, while shattered vehicles are pushed aside like toys. George tightens his grip on the steel rebar rod, his massive chest rising and falling as he prepares for the final fight. The city around them burns and collapses. Yet for this moment, everything seems to focus on the battle between the two remaining monsters. From the helicopter above, Davis watches every movement with desperate attention. His breathing is shallow from the gunshot wound, but he refuses to look away from the fight below. The crocodile lunges. Its gigantic jaws snap toward George's chest with the speed of a trap closing shut. George jumps sideways at the last possible moment and slams the steel rod downward into the creature's armored back. The metal bends under the impact. Lizzie roars in fury and swings its massive tail across the street. The blow strikes George's legs and sends the giant gorilla crashing through the side of a nearby building. Concrete explodes outward as the structure partially collapses around him. Inside the helicopter, Kate grips the control panel nervously. She knows the military jets are getting closer every second. If George cannot finish this fight soon, the airstrike will wipe out everything in the area. Below them, George pushes himself out of the rubble, shaking dust and broken glass from his fur. The crocodile charges again, its huge body sliding through debris like an unstoppable machine. George leaps forward to meet it. The two giants collide in the middle of the street, with a thunderous crash that echoes across the entire district. George grabs the reptile's upper jaw with one hand and its lower jaw with the other, struggling to keep the monstrous mouth from snapping shut. The strength of the crocodile is unbelievable. Its muscles twist like cables beneath armored scales as it pushes against George's grip. For several seconds, the two creatures remain locked together in a brutal contest of strength. Buildings tremble around them, while nearby fires illuminate the battlefield with flickering orange light. The crocodile suddenly rolls its massive body sideways. The movement throws George off balance and slams him violently into the pavement. The reptile tries to drag him toward its jaws again, determined to finish the fight. From above, Davis suddenly grabs Russell's shoulder. He points toward a damaged military helicopter lying in the middle of the street below, an Apache-attacked helicopter that crashed earlier during the chaos. Its missile pods are still attached, Russell immediately understands the idea forming in Davis's mind. Back on the ground, George manages to push the crocodile away, just long enough to stand again. The reptile snaps at his arm, barely missing as George jumps backward. The giant gorilla glances toward the wrecked helicopter. Even through the mutation, George still remembers the way humans use tools. He grabs the broken steel rod again and rushes toward the helicopter wreckage. Lizzie charges after him. George leaps onto the wrecked aircraft and rips one of the missile pods loose from its mountings. The heavy metal launcher bends and tears away under the gorilla's immense strength. The crocodile lunges forward at that exact moment. George swings the massive missile pod like a hammer. The impact slams directly into the crocodile's head with explosive force. The blow sends the reptile crashing sideways through a line of parked cars. Metal crumples like paper under its weight. But Lizzie refuses to stay down. The giant reptile rises again, roaring with fury as it charges for one final attack. Its jaws open wider than ever, revealing rows of massive teeth glistening under the burning city lights. George stands his ground. This time he waits. At the very last moment, as the crocodile lunges forward, George drives the sharpened end of the steel rod straight into the creature's eye. The rod sinks deep. Lizzie thrashes violently as the metal pierces its skull. The crocodile's enormous body crashes into George, knocking both monsters through the remains of a collapsed building. Dust and debris erupt into the air. For several seconds, nothing moves. Then the crocodile's massive body goes still. The battle is over. From the helicopter, Davis finally releases a breath he did not realize he was holding. The relief on his face is almost overwhelming. Below them, George slowly pulls himself out of the rubble, clearly exhausted, but still alive. The giant gorilla looks around the ruined city with a confused expression, as if trying to understand everything that just happened. In the distance, the approaching fighter jets suddenly change course. Kate had managed to convince the military command that the threat is neutralized. The airstrike is cancelled. Russell leans back in his seat and laughs quietly, shaking his head at the unbelievable scene below. Chicago may be half destroyed, but somehow the worst disaster has been avoided. The helicopter slowly descends toward the street where George stands among the wreckage. Davis opens the side door and carefully steps out despite his injuries. The moment his feet touch the ground, he looks up at George. For a moment, neither of them moves. Then George slowly crouches down to Davis's level. The giant gorilla studies the wounded man carefully, almost like he is making sure Davis is truly alive. Davis raises one hand and begins signing again, the same language they used for years. The same quiet conversation that built their friendship long before the mutation changed everything. George watches the gestures closely. Then he signs back, "Friend." A small smile appears on Davis's face despite the pain. Around them, emergency vehicles finally begin entering the ruined streets. Soldiers and rescue teams spread across the area, while helicopters circle overhead. The nightmare is finally ending. George looks across the destroyed skyline one last time, before turning back toward Davis. The world may never be the same after what happened in Chicago, but at least one thing survived the chaos: the bond between a man and the creature he refused to give up on. The dust slowly settles across the broken streets of Chicago as the massive body of the defeated crocodile lies motionless between collapsed buildings and burning vehicles. The battle that shook the entire city has finally ended. But the silence that follows feels almost unreal after the chaos that came before. George stands in the middle of the destroyed avenue, breathing heavily while pieces of shattered concrete slide down his enormous shoulders. His massive chest rises and falls slowly as the last waves of adrenaline fade from his system. The giant gorilla looks around the ruined skyline with confusion in his eyes, almost as if he is trying to understand what the world has become. Smoke rises from dozens of buildings. Helicopters circle in the distance, and emergency sirens echo through the streets. High above the city, the military fighter jets that were preparing for the final strike finally receive the order to stand down. One by one, they turn away from Chicago and disappear into the clouds. Inside the helicopter, Kate removes her headset and exhales deeply, relief spreading across her face for the first time since the disaster began. The danger that almost destroyed the entire city has finally been stopped. Russell leans back against the side of the helicopter while shaking his head slowly. Even after everything he has seen during his career in covert operations, the events of this day still feel impossible to believe. Davis, however, never looks away from the street below. His attention remains completely focused on George, the creature that once lived quietly inside a protected wildlife reserve but has now become the most powerful being in the city. The helicopter slowly descends toward the ground as rescue vehicles begin flooding into the surrounding streets. Firefighters and soldiers move cautiously through the wreckage, while trying to make sure the danger is truly over. When the helicopter finally touches down, Davis carefully steps onto the broken pavement, despite the pain from his wound. His body is weak, but his determination keeps him moving forward. George notices him immediately. The giant gorilla slowly lowers his head toward the ground, studying Davis carefully, as if trying to confirm that the man standing in front of him is real and unharmed. For several seconds, neither of them moves. The entire street seems to hold its breath while the man and the massive creature look at each other again after everything they survived. Then Davis slowly raises his hands. His fingers begin forming the familiar signs they have used to communicate for years. George watches closely. The enormous creature recognizes the movements instantly. The chaos of the mutation may have changed his body forever, but the bond he formed with Davis is still alive inside his mind. George gently responds with his own signs, carefully copying the gestures, despite his enormous size. Relief spreads across Davis's face as he realizes George is still himself. Around them, soldiers cautiously watch the interaction from a safe distance, unsure whether they are witnessing a peaceful moment or the calm before another disaster. Russell quietly tells the nearby soldiers to hold their positions. He understands that interfering now could ruin the fragile moment unfolding between the man and the giant gorilla. George slowly sits down among the ruins, his enormous figure towering above the destroyed vehicles scattered across the street. Even while resting, he looks like a living mountain surrounded by the remains of a city. Davis continues signing while explaining that the fight is over and that the monsters that attacked the city are gone. George listens carefully before glancing toward the massive corpse of the crocodile, lying several blocks away. The giant gorilla understands what happened. He looks back at Davis with an expression that almost resembles sadness. Despite the destruction and the violence of the battle, George never wanted any of this to happen. Far above them, news helicopters begin circling the area, broadcasting live images of the aftermath to millions of people watching around the world. Cameras capture the incredible sight of the wounded city and the giant gorilla sitting quietly beside the man who refuses to abandon him. Kate finally exits the helicopter and walks toward Davis, while carefully observing George from a distance. She knows the mutation inside George's body cannot be completely reversed, but at least the antidote removed the violent impulses that made him dangerous. Russell joins them moments later, while scanning the surrounding rooftops for potential threats. Even though the monsters are gone, he knows the situation could still become complicated. Military commanders begin arriving in armored vehicles as government officials attempt to assess the scale of the destruction. Entire districts of Chicago have been damaged, but somehow the city survived a disaster that could have been far worse. George slowly stands again, towering over the rescue teams moving through the streets. Many of the soldiers instinctively raise their weapons, but Davis immediately signals them to stop. The last thing anyone needs now is another misunderstanding. George looks across the skyline once more, watching as helicopters, emergency crews, and military vehicles spread through the ruined city. The world around him feels unfamiliar now. The peaceful forest where he once lived is gone. The quiet life he once knew no longer exists. But Davis is still standing in front of him, and that is enough. George slowly turns away from the city and begins walking toward the edge of the ruined district. His enormous footsteps shake the ground slightly as he moves between damaged buildings. Davis follows him as far as he can, while Russell and Kate watch from behind. When George reaches the end of the street, he stops and looks back one last time. The giant gorilla studies Davis carefully, almost like he is memorizing the moment. Davis raises his hand again and signs a final message. George responds with the same sign, before turning toward the distant wilderness beyond the city. Slowly, the massive creature disappears into the horizon as helicopters continue circling overhead. Chicago may take years to rebuild after the destruction of this day, but the world will never forget the moment when 3 unstoppable monsters arrived in the city and nearly destroyed everything. And when the battle finally ended, it was not missiles or bombs that saved the city. It was the connection between a man and the creature he refused to stop believing in. Somewhere far beyond the skyline, George continues walking toward the unknown future that waits for him. The world may see him as a monster, but for Davis, he will always be something else. Entirely. A friend who survived the impossible. Across the ruined districts, thousands of civilians slowly return to the streets, trying to understand what actually happened. News reporters speak urgently into their cameras while describing the impossible events that unfolded. And every television screen across the country now shows the same images of giant monsters fighting among skyscrapers. For most people watching, it still feels unreal. Only a few hours ago, Chicago became the center of a disaster that could have destroyed millions of lives. 3 mutated creatures arrived, like living natural disasters, tearing through buildings and streets while the military struggled desperately to stop them. Yet somehow, the city survived. Rescue teams continue pulling injured civilians from damaged structures, while firefighters extinguish the last remaining fires. Soldiers stand guard across several districts, making sure the situation remains under control while scientists begin studying the strange biological contamination left behind by the pathogen. Inside a temporary command center built near the edge of the city, government officials and military leaders gather around large screens displaying satellite images of the area. The conversation inside the room is intense as experts try to understand how something like this could happen in the first place. Energene, the corporation responsible for creating the dangerous pathogen, has already become the center of a massive investigation. Their research was meant to rewrite genetic structures, but in the wrong hands, the technology turned into something far more dangerous than anyone expected. Instead of curing diseases, it created monsters. Kate stands near one of the large monitors, while explaining everything she knows about the pathogen to the officials gathered around the table. Her voice remains calm but determined as she describes how the genetic editing system worked, and why the mutation process became uncontrollable. The scientists, listening to her explanation, exchange uneasy glances. The technology that caused this disaster is still out there, and now everyone knows it exists. Russell leans against the wall near the entrance of the command center, listening quietly while the experts debate possible containment strategies. He knows that what happened in Chicago will change the way governments treat genetic research forever. Weapons no longer need to be bombs or missiles. Sometimes they can be living creatures. Outside the command center, Davis sits on the back of an ambulance while medics carefully bandage the wound on his shoulder. His body is exhausted after everything he experienced during the battle, but his mind is still focused on one thing: George. He keeps looking toward the distant forest beyond the city skyline, wondering where the giant gorilla went after leaving Chicago. Despite the destruction that followed him, Davis knows that George never wanted to harm anyone. The mutation forced him into a violent state he could barely control. But once the antidote reached his system, the creature returned to the same intelligent being Davis had known for years. The difference now is that George is no longer just a rare gorilla living inside a protected sanctuary. Now he is something entirely new. A creature powerful enough to fight monsters that threatened an entire city. Kate eventually walks out of the command center and approaches Davis, carrying several medical reports and scientific notes in her hands. She sits beside him quietly for a moment, while watching the sunrise slowly illuminate the damaged skyline. For the first time since the disaster began, the city feels calm. Kate explains that the antidote they used cannot reverse the mutation completely. George will remain enormous and physically enhanced for the rest of his life, because the pathogen permanently altered his genetic structure. But the most dangerous side effects are gone. His mind is stable again. Davis nods slowly while absorbing the information. He always suspected that George could never return to his original size, but hearing the confirmation still feels strange. The world has changed. George has changed with it. Russell joins them a few minutes later while holding a small tablet showing satellite images captured earlier that morning. One of the images clearly shows a massive shape moving through the forests far beyond the city limits. George, the giant gorilla, is already miles away from Chicago, heading deeper into the wilderness where human cities cannot easily reach him. Russell remarks that maybe that is the best possible outcome for everyone involved. The world just witnessed how powerful George has become, and keeping him far away from large populations might be the safest solution. Davis understands the reasoning, but a small part of him still wishes things could have been different. For years, George lived peacefully inside a sanctuary, where he was protected and cared for. Now that quiet life has vanished forever. The creature is now part of a world that will never stop watching him. Across the country, scientists begin analyzing the events of the Chicago disaster, while governments start drafting new laws to regulate genetic research. The technology that created the monsters cannot simply disappear. Someone will eventually try to use it again. The only question is whether the world will be ready when that happens. Meanwhile, deep within the vast forests far beyond the city, George continues moving through the wilderness with slow, powerful steps. The massive trees surrounding him sway slightly as he passes, and animals scatter quietly while sensing the presence of something enormous moving through their territory. George eventually stops near the edge of a wide valley where rivers and mountains stretch far into the distance. The environment here is wild and untouched, far away from human cities and the chaos they bring. For the first time since the mutation changed his life, the giant gorilla finally seems at peace. He looks toward the distant horizon, while the wind moves gently through his fur. The memories of the battle still linger in his mind, but they are slowly fading as the quiet rhythm of nature returns around him. Despite everything that happened, George survived. And somewhere far away in a recovering city, the man who refused to abandon him is still alive as well. Back in Chicago, the rebuilding process has already begun. Construction teams arrive to clear debris, while engineers begin planning how to restore the damaged districts. The disaster left deep scars across the city, but the determination to rebuild is stronger than ever. For the people living there, Chicago is more than just buildings and streets. It is home. News reports continue discussing the incredible battle that saved the city, and soon the story spreads across the entire world. Images of the giant gorilla standing beside the wounded man become one of the most powerful symbols of the event. Some people call George a monster, others call him a hero. But for Davis, the truth is far simpler. George is still the same intelligent creature he rescued years ago. The same being who learned to communicate through sign language and share quiet moments inside a peaceful sanctuary. The only difference now is that the entire world has seen what he is capable of. As the sun climbs higher into the sky above Chicago, the city slowly begins its long recovery. Emergency sirens fade, helicopters leave the area, and the streets slowly return to normal life. Yet everyone who witnessed the events of that night knows something important. The world is no longer the same. Somewhere beyond the mountains and forests, the giant gorilla walks freely through the wilderness, while carrying the memory of a friendship strong enough to survive even the most impossible circumstances. And if another threat ever appears in the future, the world now knows that sometimes the most unexpected hero can come from the most unlikely place. The story of Chicago will be remembered for generations, not only as a disaster that nearly destroyed a great city, but also as the moment when a bond between human and creature proved strong enough to overcome chaos, fear, and the power of monsters. Because in the end, the most powerful force in the entire story was never the mutation, the monsters, or the destruction. It was trust. The world does not simply move on after a disaster like the one that struck Chicago. Even weeks later, the city still carries the visible marks of the battle that unfolded between creatures powerful enough to tear through steel, concrete, and glass, as if the entire skyline were nothing more than fragile scenery. Entire districts remain under reconstruction, while engineers work day and night to stabilize damaged buildings. And every street corner still carries reminders of the night when 3 gigantic creatures turned the city into a battlefield that the world watched in disbelief. News networks continue replaying the footage, analyzing every moment of the chaos. And for many viewers, the images still feel like something taken from a movie rather than a real event that unfolded in the middle of a major American city. For Davis, the aftermath feels far more personal than anything the cameras captured. Every time he walks through the rebuilding streets, he remembers the exact places where the battle took place. He remembers where George crashed through the cargo plane, where the wolf first appeared among the buildings, and where the final fight with the enormous crocodile shook the entire district like an earthquake. These places are now filled with construction crews and cranes, yet in his mind, he can still see the moment when everything almost spiraled out of control. The strange thing is that most people now talk about the event as if it were a miracle. The official reports confirm that the number of casualties remained far lower than anyone expected, considering the scale of destruction. Entire buildings collapsed, highways were torn apart, and several blocks of the city were almost completely destroyed. Yet somehow, the majority of civilians managed to escape before the worst of the fighting reached them. Emergency systems worked, evacuation orders spread quickly, and in the end, the disaster that could have become one of the deadliest events in modern history became something else entirely. It became a story. Across Chicago, people speak about that night in dozens of different ways. Some remember the fear and chaos when the monsters first appeared. Others remember the moment when the giant gorilla turned against the other creatures and began fighting to stop them. Children draw pictures of the battle in their school notebooks, while street artists paint massive murals, showing the enormous silhouette of George standing among the skyscrapers, like a guardian protecting the city. For many residents, the story has already grown larger than the reality, transforming into something symbolic about survival and courage in the face of something completely unimaginable. Kate watches these changes with mixed emotions. From a scientific perspective, the disaster remains deeply troubling because it proves how dangerous uncontrolled genetic engineering can become when corporations prioritize power and profit over responsibility. The pathogen that caused the mutations was originally designed as a tool to repair damaged DNA sequences and potentially cure devastating illnesses. But when the technology was pushed beyond safe limits, it produced results that no one fully understood. The creatures created by the mutation were not simply larger versions of the animals they once were. Their bodies were rewritten at a biological level, combining rapid growth, accelerated healing, and unpredictable neurological effects that made their behavior extremely volatile. The world now understands that such technology cannot remain unregulated. International research organizations begin forming new ethical boards to oversee genetic experiments, while governments introduce emergency legislation restricting certain types of biological manipulation. Scientific conferences are organized across universities and laboratories, where researchers debate how to continue studying genetic editing without risking another catastrophe. Many scientists believe that technology still holds enormous potential to cure diseases that medicine has struggled with for decades, but everyone now agrees that the power to rewrite the genetic code of living creatures must be handled with extreme caution. While these debates unfold in laboratories and government offices, Davis finds himself thinking about something much simpler. He thinks about George. The giant gorilla has not been seen near the city since the moment he disappeared into the wilderness after the battle ended. Satellite monitoring occasionally detects large movements deep within remote mountain regions, suggesting that George has traveled far away from human populations, possibly seeking environments where he can exist without drawing attention. Those remote valleys and forests stretch across hundreds of miles of protected land, where human activity remains minimal, making them ideal places for a creature of his size to survive. Russell quietly confirms that several agencies are aware of George's location, but have no immediate plans to interfere with him. From a strategic standpoint, the government prefers to leave the creature alone unless he begins moving toward populated areas again. Attempting to capture or contain something that powerful would be extremely difficult and potentially dangerous, especially when the world is still recovering from the last encounter. For Davis, this decision brings a strange sense of peace. George deserves a chance to live without chains, laboratories, or corporate experiments trying to turn him into something else. For most of his life, he lived inside a protected sanctuary where his world was carefully controlled by human hands. The mutation changed everything about his physical existence, but perhaps it also gave him something he never truly experienced before: freedom. Months pass, and slowly the media attention surrounding the Chicago disaster begins to fade as other global events capture the headlines. Reconstruction projects restore the damaged districts of the city, and new buildings begin rising where shattered structures once stood. Tourists visit the locations where the battle took place, taking photographs beside monuments that now commemorate the event. For the city itself, the experience becomes another chapter in a long history of surviving extraordinary challenges. Davis eventually returns to wildlife conservation work, though his life is never quite as quiet as it once was. Journalists continue requesting interviews about George. Scientists seek his insight into the creature's intelligence, and occasionally government representatives asked him to consult on research regarding large animal behavior. Despite the attention, he refuses to treat George as a scientific curiosity or a public spectacle. To him, the giant gorilla remains the same intelligent creature he rescued from poachers years earlier, long before anyone imagined that genetic mutation would transform him into something capable of standing against monsters. One evening, near the end of autumn, Davis travels to a remote observation point overlooking a vast forest valley several hundred miles from Chicago. The region remains largely untouched by human development, consisting of dense forests, winding rivers, and towering mountain ridges that stretch across the horizon. Satellite data suggested unusual movement patterns in this area during the previous weeks, and part of Davis quietly hopes that the signals might mean George has settled somewhere nearby. As the sun slowly lowers behind the mountains, the valley fills with deep golden light, and the forest canopy begins casting long shadows across the landscape. The environment feels calm, almost timeless, far removed from the noise and chaos of modern cities. For several hours, nothing moves except the wind passing through the trees. Then the ground trembles slightly. At first, the movement is subtle enough to feel like distant thunder, but gradually, the vibration becomes clearer. Birds suddenly scatter from the treetops, while several animals rush through the underbrush, as if sensing the approach of something enormous moving through the forest. Davis stands quietly on the ridge, without making any sudden movements. Moments later, a massive figure slowly emerges from between the towering trees at the edge of the valley. George, the giant gorilla, steps forward into the fading sunlight, his enormous frame partially illuminated by the last rays of the evening sun. Even after months apart, the sight of him still feels astonishing. His size remains immense, far beyond anything nature originally designed. Yet his movements appear calm and controlled as he surveys the valley around him. For a long moment, neither of them moves. Then Davis slowly raises his hands and begins forming the familiar gestures they once used to communicate. Inside the sanctuary, the movements feel almost nostalgic now, like returning to a language shared between two friends who have traveled very different paths. George watches carefully. Recognition spreads across his expression as he slowly mirrors the gestures, responding with deliberate movements despite the massive scale of his hands. The exchange lasts only a few seconds, but in that brief moment, it confirms something important. The connection between them still exists. The world may see George as a creature born from a dangerous experiment, a living reminder of what happens when science crosses certain boundaries. Governments may analyze him as a potential threat, and historians may remember the night he fought monsters in the middle of Chicago. But standing there in the quiet valley, none of those interpretations seem to matter. For Davis, the truth remains simple. George survived a catastrophe that could have destroyed him, and now he walks freely through a wilderness large enough to hold a creature of his extraordinary size. The mountains, rivers, and forests surrounding the valley stretch far beyond the horizon, offering a life far removed from laboratories, corporate greed, or crowded cities. George eventually turns back toward the forest. Before disappearing among the towering trees, he glances once more toward the ridge, where Davis stands watching. The gesture lasts only a moment, but it carries the quiet understanding that both of them recognize. Some friendships do not require constant presence to remain real. Then the giant gorilla continues walking deeper into the wilderness until the forest closes behind him and the valley returns to silence. In the months that follow, the world slowly begins to treat the events in Chicago not only as a disaster, but also as a turning point in how humanity understands the power it holds over nature. Scientists, governments, and ordinary people all begin asking the same question in different ways. What happens when human ambition reaches into the deepest structures of life itself and starts rewriting the rules of biology? The answer had appeared in the middle of Chicago as towering creatures capable of tearing through steel and concrete. Creatures born not from evolution, but from experimentation that pushed far beyond ethical boundaries. For the scientific community, the incident becomes one of the most heavily studied biological events in modern history. Genetic laboratories across the world analyze the fragments of data recovered from Enogen's destroyed research servers. Many of those files reveal how the mutation pathogen functioned at a molecular level, how it accelerated growth, reinforced muscle density, and altered neural activity to create creatures that were faster, stronger, and far more aggressive than their natural counterparts. The research confirmed something both fascinating and terrifying. The technology worked. It simply worked too well. The pathogen was capable of rewriting genetic instructions inside living cells almost instantly, forcing rapid adaptation that normally would take thousands of years through natural evolution. In theory, this kind of technology could revolutionize medicine by repairing damaged DNA and eliminating certain diseases permanently. In practice, when used recklessly, it created creatures that could destabilize entire ecosystems and threaten human civilization itself. Kate becomes one of the leading voices explaining these dangers to international research councils. She spends months traveling between conferences and government hearings, describing exactly how the mutation system was originally designed and how it spiraled out of control once Enogene decided to treat it like a weapon instead of a medical breakthrough. Her testimony leads to new global regulations that restrict certain types of genetic editing experiments. While the scientific world refuses to abandon the technology completely, it now operates under far stricter oversight. For Kate, the experience is bittersweet. She knows the research still holds enormous potential to save lives someday. But the destruction in Chicago will always remain a reminder of how easily powerful discoveries can become dangerous when handled without responsibility. Meanwhile, Russell continues working behind the scenes in ways that few people ever notice. His agency quietly monitors any attempt to recreate the pathogen technology using information leaked from Enogen's laboratories. Several private organizations attempt to replicate the research during the following year, believing they can control the mutation process more carefully than the corporation that originally created it. Every attempt fails. The mutation process proves far too unstable when removed from its original research environment. Russell makes sure those experiments never reach dangerous levels again. Some laboratories are shut down quietly. Others suddenly lose their funding after government investigations begin asking uncomfortable questions. For most people around the world, these actions remain invisible. They simply continue living their lives while the story of Chicago gradually transforms into something closer to legend than current news. Tourists begin visiting the city, specifically to see the areas where the monsters once fought. Memorial plaques mark the streets where the battle between George and the mutated wolf shattered entire rows of buildings. Another monument stands near the location where the giant crocodile finally fell after the final confrontation. Over time, the damaged districts are rebuilt with new architecture designed to be stronger and more resilient than before. Life returns to normal. Yet every once in a while, someone will pause while walking through those streets and remember the night when enormous creatures moved between the skyscrapers like living storms. Davis rarely visits those memorial sites. Instead, he spends most of his time returning to the type of work he always loved, protecting wildlife and helping maintain conservation areas where endangered animals can survive without interference from illegal hunters or expanding human development. After everything that happened, he feels even more strongly that nature should be protected rather than manipulated. Animals should never become experiments designed to satisfy human ambition. Despite returning to his old work, Davis cannot completely escape the shadow of what happened. Journalists still occasionally try to contact him for interviews, and scientists frequently ask if he has heard anything new about George. Even now, the giant gorilla remains one of the most mysterious creatures on the planet. No one knows exactly how long the mutation will continue affecting his biology, how large he might eventually grow, or how his enhanced intelligence may evolve over time. But one thing becomes clear through satellite tracking. George has established a territory. Far beyond the nearest human settlements lies a vast stretch of wilderness where mountain forests, deep valleys, and wide rivers create one of the most isolated ecosystems on the continent. Satellite images occasionally capture enormous shapes moving through that region, usually near water sources or large forest clearings. The movement patterns suggest that George has fully adapted to life in the wild, traveling between valleys and mountain ridges as if he has always belonged there. Wildlife experts studying the area begin noticing something remarkable. The ecosystem around George's territory begins stabilizing in unusual ways. Predator populations shift slightly, migration routes change, and certain animal species start avoiding particular valleys entirely. It is as if the natural world has slowly accepted the presence of a new apex creature and reorganized itself around him. Nature has a way of adapting. For Davis, this knowledge brings comfort rather than concern. If George can live peacefully within the wilderness without threatening human populations, then perhaps the world can finally leave him alone. Nearly a year after the events in Chicago, Davis once again travels toward the edge of the remote mountain region where George was last detected. He does not bring cameras or tracking equipment, only basic supplies and the quiet hope that he might see the creature again. The journey takes several days through dense forests and steep mountain trails where human footprints rarely appear. The further he travels from civilization, the more the environment begins feeling untouched by the modern world. Eventually, he reaches a high ridge overlooking a vast valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and ancient forests. Rivers wind through the landscape like silver ribbons, reflecting the afternoon sun. The entire region feels enormous and silent, the kind of place where something truly massive could exist without ever encountering another human being. As evening approaches, Davis sits on the ridge, watching the valley below. For hours, nothing happens. Then the trees begin moving. At first, the disturbance looked like ordinary wind shifting through the forest canopy. But gradually, the movement becomes more deliberate, as if something enormous is pushing its way through the trees, rather than the wind simply passing over them. Moments later, a gigantic shape steps into the clearing beside the river. George, even from the distant ridge, the gorilla's size is unmistakable. His body appears even larger than it did during the Chicago battle, suggesting that the mutation may still be influencing his growth. Yet his posture remains calm and balanced as he kneels beside the river to drink. The sight feels strangely peaceful. There are no helicopters circling above him, no collapsing buildings, no terrified crowds running through the streets. Only mountains, water, and the quiet rhythm of the wilderness. Davis does not attempt to approach. Instead, he simply raises his hands and forms the same familiar signs they once shared. The distance between them is far too great for George to clearly see the gestures. Yet for a moment, the gorilla pauses and lifts his head as if sensing something familiar, carried by the wind. George slowly turns toward the ridge. For several seconds, the enormous creature stands completely still, staring across the valley, toward the distant human figure standing alone against the fading sky. Then he lowers his head slightly in what almost looks like recognition. Without another movement, he turns back toward the forest and continues walking deeper into the wilderness until the trees swallow his silhouette completely. Davis remains on the ridge, long after the sun disappears behind the mountains. The world may continue debating the dangers of genetic engineering and the responsibilities of science, But here in the quiet valley, none of those arguments matter. What matters is that somewhere within this vast wilderness lives a creature who survived an impossible chain of events and found a place where he can exist without being hunted, studied, or controlled. The story that began with a laboratory experiment and ended with a battle in the middle of Chicago does not truly belong to scientists or governments. It belongs to the creature who walked away from it all and chose the wild instead. Time continues moving forward, and as months slowly turn into years, the events that once shook Chicago gradually settle into the deeper layers of history. News channels no longer replay the footage every night, and the world that once stared at the screens in disbelief eventually finds new headlines and new stories to follow. Yet, even when public attention fades, the impact of what happened does not disappear. The night when 3 mutated creatures entered the city changed the way humanity thinks about science, responsibility, and the fragile balance between nature and human ambition. Chicago itself transforms into a symbol of resilience. The districts that once looked like battlefields slowly rise again with new buildings, reinforced structures, and redesigned streets that incorporate lessons learned from the disaster. Engineers who studied the damage during reconstruction begin designing urban systems that are stronger, smarter, and capable of responding faster in emergencies. The city's skyline eventually returns to its familiar shape, but the people who live there never quite forget what it looked like when enormous creatures moved between those buildings. Memorial parks are built in several locations where the worst destruction once occurred. Visitors walk along quiet paths surrounded by trees and monuments that describe the events of that night in careful historical detail. Some plaques focus on the scientific dangers that led to the catastrophe, while others honor the firefighters, police officers, and rescue workers who risked their lives during the evacuation efforts. One monument simply displays a massive sculpture of a gorilla silhouette standing beside the outline of a human hand, representing the unusual friendship that played such an important role in the story. Davis rarely visits those monuments. For him, the memories remain far too vivid to turn into something symbolic or artistic. Instead, he continues working in wildlife conservation programs, helping protect remote ecosystems where endangered animals can survive without interference from poachers or expanding cities. The experience with George has only strengthened his belief that nature deserves protection rather than manipulation. During these years, scientists continue studying the fragments of research recovered from Energen's destroyed laboratories. Although the original pathogen technology remains banned under strict international agreements, researchers quietly continue exploring safer forms of genetic editing that might one day help cure diseases. The scientific community understands that knowledge itself is not the enemy. The real danger lies in how that knowledge is used. Kate becomes one of the leading advocates for responsible genetic research. Her work helps establish new ethical guidelines, designed to ensure that no corporation or government ever attempts to weaponize biological technology in the same reckless way again. She speaks at universities, participates in global science councils, and works with international regulators to design systems that prevent uncontrolled experimentation. Despite all the progress in research policy, one mystery continues to capture the attention of scientists and wildlife experts around the world. Satellite monitoring occasionally detects enormous movements within the remote mountain regions where the giant gorilla settled after leaving Chicago. The signals confirm that he is still alive and active within the vast wilderness territory that now serves as his home. The ecosystem around that region has gradually adapted to his presence. Herd animals change migration patterns, predators adjust their hunting grounds, and entire valleys sometimes fall silent when the massive creature moves through them. For wildlife researchers, the phenomenon becomes one of the most fascinating ecological adjustments ever observed. Nature has effectively incorporated an entirely new apex species into the environment, and the balance of the ecosystem continues evolving around that presence. Yet no one attempts to interfere. The government quietly enforces a protected exclusion zone around the entire region, preventing tourism or scientific expeditions from entering too deeply into the area. Officially, the territory is classified as a conservation reserve, but everyone involved understands the real reason for the restriction. Some places are better left undisturbed. Several years after the Chicago disaster, Davis decides to visit the outer edges of that protected region once again. He does not travel there with scientific equipment or official permission. Instead, he simply follows the same mountain trails he once used during earlier conservation work, moving quietly through forests that stretch across hundreds of miles of untouched wilderness. The journey takes days. The deeper he travels into the mountains, the more the world of cities and technology begins fading away. Roads disappear, mobile signals vanish, and the environment becomes something far older and more powerful than human civilization. Rivers carve deep paths through valleys, while towering cliffs rise above ancient forests that have stood for centuries. Eventually, Davis reaches a high ridge, overlooking a massive valley surrounded by mountains on every side. The landscape below feels almost prehistoric in its scale, filled with enormous trees, winding rivers, and mist drifting slowly through the lower forests. If a creature the size of George were to live anywhere on Earth without being discovered by crowds of people, this would be the perfect place. Davis waits on the ridge through the entire afternoon, while the sun slowly moves across the sky. Hours pass without any sign of movement, except the wind stirring through the forest canopy. Then the valley changes. Birds suddenly scatter from the trees in several directions, and a deep vibration travels faintly through the ground beneath the ridge. The disturbance moves slowly across the forest, as if something massive is walking through the trees far below. Moments later, the canopy parts. A gigantic figure steps into the open clearing beside a wide river that cuts through the valley floor. George. Even after all these years, the sight of the enormous gorilla still feels almost unreal. His body appears larger than before, suggesting that the mutation may have continued affecting his growth long after the original event. Yet there is nothing aggressive in his posture as he kneels beside the water and drinks quietly from the river. The entire valley remains calm. No chaos, no helicopters, no collapsing buildings. Only the quiet presence of a creature who now belongs completely to the wilderness. Davis does not move closer. Instead, he simply watches from the ridge while the evening sunlight begins coloring the mountains with deep shades of orange and gold. The scene feels peaceful in a way that the world rarely allows. For several minutes, George drinks from the river before slowly lifting his head and looking across the valley. Something about the moment changes. Although the distance between them remains enormous, George seems to sense the presence of the lone human standing on the ridge. His massive head turns slowly toward the mountainside where Davis stands watching. Neither of them moves. The valley falls completely silent, except for the sound of wind moving through the trees. Davis raises his hands one final time and forms the same gestures he once used when teaching George sign language inside the sanctuary so many years ago. The movements feel familiar, almost nostalgic, like speaking a language that belongs only to two individuals who shared something unique. From the valley floor, George remains still for several seconds. Then the giant gorilla slowly lowers his head in a small movement that almost resembles acknowledgement. Without another gesture, he turns and begins walking back into the forest. The trees close behind him as his massive figure disappears deeper into the wilderness that now belongs entirely to him. Davis remains on the ridge long after the last light of the sunset fades from the mountains. The valley eventually returns to complete darkness, leaving only the quiet sounds of nature echoing through the vast landscape. The story that began with a laboratory experiment and exploded into chaos in the middle of Chicago has finally reached its quiet conclusion. Somewhere beyond those mountains walks a creature powerful enough to shake cities, yet wise enough to choose solitude over destruction. And perhaps that is the most important lesson the world could learn from everything that happened. Years pass after the chaos that once shook Chicago, yet the memory of that night never truly disappears from the minds of the people who witnessed it. The city rebuilt its skyline, repaired its streets, and restored the neighborhoods that were once crushed beneath the footsteps of creatures no one believed could ever exist. But beneath the surface of everyday life, there remains a quiet understanding that the world changed that night. And once humanity has seen something like that, it can never completely forget. The battle that once looked like the end of everything slowly transforms into a moment of reflection for scientists, governments, and ordinary citizens. Universities begin teaching entire courses about the disaster, analyzing the chain of decisions that allowed a powerful genetic experiment to escape the boundaries of responsible research. The lessons are studied carefully because the world understands something important now. Technology capable of rewriting life itself cannot be treated like ordinary scientific discovery. Kate becomes deeply involved in shaping the global policies that now regulate advanced genetic engineering. Her experience with the mutation pathogen makes her one of the most trusted voices in international research committees. She spends years traveling between laboratories and scientific summits, explaining how easily scientific curiosity can become dangerous when ethical limits are ignored. Many researchers listen closely because the consequences of that mistake were not theoretical. They were visible in the shattered buildings and broken streets of Chicago. At the same time, governments quietly restructured the way they monitor private research corporations. Agencies like the one Russell works for expand their oversight programs, making sure that no organization secretly attempts to rebuild the technology that once created the mutated creatures. Russell continues operating in the background, exactly the way he always has, ensuring that dangerous research disappears before it ever has the chance to grow into another disaster. Despite all the global conversations and political changes, Davis chooses a much quieter path after the events in Chicago. He returns to the type of work he always cared about most, protecting wildlife and supporting conservation programs that safeguard endangered ecosystems. The experience with George only strengthens his belief that animals should never be used as tools for scientific ambition. They deserve to live within the natural balance of the world, rather than becoming experiments designed to satisfy human curiosity. Although Davis tries to focus on his work, he cannot completely escape the shadow of the past. Every few months, someone from the media contacts him asking for interviews about George, and occasionally scientists request information about the gorilla's intelligence or behavior. Davis rarely agrees to speak publicly about it because the story has already been told enough times. The world has turned George into a symbol, but for Davis, the creature will always remain something far simpler and more personal. George was a friend long before he became a legend. Years earlier, satellite monitoring confirmed that the giant gorilla had settled in one of the most remote wilderness regions on the continent. The area stretches across a massive chain of mountains, where forests cover the valleys like deep green oceans, and rivers cut through ancient stone formations that have existed for thousands of years. Human activity in the region remains extremely limited because the terrain is difficult to reach and largely protected by environmental laws. At first, the presence of such a massive creature worried wildlife experts. But over time, something remarkable begins to happen. The ecosystem slowly adapts to George's presence in ways that scientists find fascinating. Herd animals alter their migration routes to avoid certain valleys. Predators adjust their hunting territories, and entire sections of forest become unusually quiet. Whenever the massive gorilla passes through them, nature reorganizes itself. The balance of the wilderness shifts to accommodate a creature that technically should not exist, yet the environment finds a way to integrate him into its complex web of life. Davis occasionally receives satellite reports showing the enormous movement patterns that mark George's territory. The data suggests that the gorilla travels across several valleys and mountain ridges, following seasonal changes that affect food availability and climate. In many ways, George has become something like a wandering guardian of the wilderness, a silent giant moving through landscapes where human civilization rarely intrudes. For several years, Davis resists the temptation to visit that region again because he knows that George deserves space to live freely without constant human attention. However, the connection between them never truly disappears, and eventually curiosity becomes impossible to ignore. One autumn, Davis travels back toward the outer boundaries of the protected wilderness where George was last detected. The journey takes him far beyond the modern world, through forests where no roads exist and mountains that rise like ancient walls, separating civilization from the deeper wilderness beyond. Each step of the journey reminds him how small human life can feel when surrounded by landscapes that have existed long before cities were ever built. After several days of hiking, he finally reaches a high ridge overlooking a massive valley surrounded by towering cliffs and thick forests. Rivers flow across the valley floor like silver threads, reflecting the afternoon sunlight, and clouds drift slowly across the distant mountain peaks. The place feels untouched. If a creature the size of George were to live anywhere on Earth without attracting crowds of people or scientific expeditions, this would be the perfect place. Davis spends the entire afternoon sitting quietly on the ridge, watching the valley below. Hours pass with nothing but the sounds of wind and distant birds moving through the trees. The wilderness seems peaceful and empty, yet Davis knows something enormous moves through those forests. As the sun begins lowering behind the mountains, the valley slowly fills with long shadows, stretching across the forest canopy. The golden light of evening spreads across the river, turning the water into a shimmering path cutting through the trees. Then the forest shifts. At first, the movement looks like nothing more than wind pushing through the leaves. But the disturbance gradually becomes stronger. Birds suddenly scatter from several sections of the forest, while animals rush through the undergrowth as if something massive is approaching. River. George. Even from the distant ridge, the gorilla's size feels overwhelming. His body appears even larger than it did during the Chicago battle, suggesting that the mutation may still be influencing his physical development. Despite that massive size, his movements remain calm and deliberate as he walks toward the river and kneels beside the water. The sight feels strangely peaceful. There are no explosions or collapsing buildings surrounding him now. The giant creature exists exactly where he belongs, within a landscape vast enough to hold something extraordinary. Davis watches quietly, resisting the urge to approach. For several minutes, George drinks from the river while the evening sunlight reflects across the valley. The scene feels so calm that it almost seems impossible to believe this is the same creature that once fought monsters between skyscrapers. Eventually, George lifts his head. For a brief moment, the enormous gorilla looks toward the mountains where Davis stands on the ridge. The distance between them is enormous, yet something about the moment suggests that George senses a familiar presence somewhere beyond the trees. Davis slowly raises his hands and forms the same gestures they once used when communicating through sign language. The movements are small and distant. George probably cannot clearly see them from across the valley. Yet the gorilla remains still for several seconds, as if recognizing something carried through the wind. Finally, the massive creature lowers his head slightly in a subtle movement that almost looks like acknowledgement. Without another gesture, he turns and begins walking back into the forest, disappearing among the trees that quickly swallow his enormous figure. The valley returns to silence. Davis remains on the ridge long after the sun disappears behind the mountains. The sky slowly darkens, while the first stars appear above the wilderness, stretching across the horizon. Somewhere within those forests walks a creature who once stood in the center of a disaster powerful enough to change the world. Now he moves quietly through a landscape large enough to keep him hidden from civilization. For Davis, that knowledge is enough. George survived everything that tried to destroy him, and now he lives in a place where no laboratories, corporations, or military forces can ever reach him again. And perhaps that is the most peaceful ending any story like this could ever have. The black clouds over Chicago churned violently as George, Ralph, and Lizzie approached the outskirts of the city. Davis gripped the controls of the stolen UH-60 Black Hawk, his knuckles white, while Kate checked the coordinates on her tablet. Below them, George's massive fists smashed through trees, cars, and anything in his path. The mutated strength of the pathogen, evident in every movement. "George is bigger than ever," Davis shouted over the roar of the helicopter. Ralph yipped and darted between shadows, faster and deadlier than any natural wolf could be. His glowing eyes fixed on the strange frequency that Energene had broadcasted from the Willis Tower. Lizzie slid through the flooded streets, the water gushing like a tidal wave from her movement, smashing hydrants and overturning vehicles with ease. Davis adjusted the helicopter's approach, aiming to guide George and the other two into the industrial district. "This way, buddy," he shouted, waving his arms, hoping George would respond. The gorilla halted, sniffing the air, recognizing Davis instantly, his roar echoing across the approaching storm as Ralph and Lizzie followed reluctantly. On the ground, chaos reigned. Sirens blared and civilians ran screaming, guided by emergency personnel scrambling to safety. Cranes toppled and warehouses crumbled as George's massive hands smashed through concrete, leaving twisted metal in his wake. Ralph leaped atop trucks, snapping chains and tearing tires, while Lizzie moved through the streets like a predatory flood, her jaw snapping at anything unfortunate enough to be in her path. Davis banked the helicopter sharply to avoid falling debris, sweat streaming down his face as he surveyed the destruction below. Kate clutched her tablet, mapping safe routes for fleeing civilians and calculating the trajectory of each creature's path. "George is heading straight for the city center," she warned Claire-wide, observing from her high-rise lab atop the Willis Tower, smiled coldly as she monitored the beast's progress. "They'll all converge exactly where I want them," she said to Brett. Brett hesitated, concerned about the civilians, but Claire waved him off. "Collateral damage is irrelevant. We're proving a point," she said, eyes gleaming with malice. Back in the helicopter, Davis fired a series of flare grenades to redirect Lizzie's aggression, guiding her into a less populated street. The creatures followed, but George's massive fists smashed anything in their path, and Ralph snarled in excitement, clearly feeding off the chaos. Davis radioed Harvey Russell, giving precise instructions to block roads and form safe corridors for civilians. "Set up barriers along the industrial district," Davis shouted. Below, massive trucks, cranes, and shipping containers were repositioned as obstacles, giving George, Ralph, and Lizzie a constrained path to minimize further destruction. The ground trembled under George's steps, each footfall resonating like a small earthquake. Ralph leaped between broken rooftops, snapping at transformers, while Lizzie tore through the streets with terrifying speed. Davis guided George with a mix of shouts and visual cues, waving his arms and firing additional flares. "Follow me. This way," he yelled, heart pounding. Kate monitored structural integrity and civilian density, directing the helicopter to avoid areas where civilians were trapped. The three beasts moved in unison, guided partially by the transmitter, partially by Davis' presence, and fully powered by the pathogen that had rewritten their instincts. George stopped momentarily at the edge of the industrial district. sniffing the air, as if calculating the safest route to minimize casualties. Ralph mirrored him, tail lashing aggressively, while Lizzie surged forward, snapping her jaws at metal containers. Davis banked the helicopter low, letting George see him clearly, his hands raised and signaling the path forward. Below, cranes swayed dangerously, shipping containers tipped over, and sparks flew from downed electrical lines. Civilians ran through alleys and temporary corridors, set up by emergency personnel, dodging falling debris and crashing vehicles. The path Davis had chosen was narrow but effective, leading the beasts into the industrial zone, while keeping downtown largely untouched. George smashed through a warehouse wall, his enormous body leaving a gaping hole behind, while Ralph leaped onto a crane, sending it toppling onto nearby trucks. Lizzie surged through a partially flooded street, her tail whipping debris into the air, narrowly missing a fleeing civilian. Davis and Kate knew the worst was yet to come. The confrontation at the Willis Tower. The creatures were heading there naturally, guided by the transmitter, and George's instincts were unerring in following Davis' signals. Davis radioed Harvey again. "Prepare the containment equipment. We'll need everything to control them at the tower." Harvey replied, his voice tense. "Understood. All units are in position." Claire, watching the chaos from above, tapped a finger on the glass of the Willis Tower's control panel. "Everything is going exactly according to plan," she said. Brett, her brother, looked uneasy, glancing at the monitors showing George, Ralph, and Lizzie barreling toward the city. "This is insane," he said. Claire ignored him. "They'll all converge. Then we control everything. And no one can stop me," she said, a cold smile spreading across her face. Meanwhile, Davis and Kate descended closer to the industrial zone, keeping George in sight and adjusting the helicopter to maintain visual contact with Ralph and Lizzie. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the cries of fleeing civilians. Davis gritted his teeth, knowing the slightest mistake could lead to disaster. George roared, a deep, resounding sound that echoed off the industrial walls, as Ralph growled beside him. Lizzie lunged over a barricade, snapping it in half as she advanced. Davis fired more flares, guiding Lizzie and keeping the path clear. Kate prepared a device to amplify the signal, hoping to lure the animals exactly where they needed them. The path of destruction stretched 4 blocks, but the industrial district offered a controlled environment. George smashed through a concrete barrier, leaving Ralph to leap over the debris, and Lizzie tore into the final barricade, water and debris flooding the streets. Davis felt his stomach tighten. "This is it," he said. Once they reach the tower, the real showdown begins. Kate nodded, clutching her tablet tightly. They had bought as much time as possible, and the stage was set for the final confrontation with Claire White and her sinister plan. The sun dipped behind the skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the city as George, Ralph, and Lizzie reached the outskirts of the Willis Tower. Davis guided the helicopter low, his eyes scanning the chaos below. The streets were fractured, cars overturned, and fires burned sporadically, a testament to the path of destruction George and the other 2 beasts had carved. Kate leaned over, gripping the seat, analyzing the structural data of the tower. "We have to get them inside without them destroying the entire city," she shouted over the rotors. Davis nodded, his jaw set. "George trusts me. If I can keep him focused, we might actually pull this off." Below, Claire White stood atop the tower, her transmitter pulsing with a frequency designed to manipulate the animals. Her brother Brett was beside her, tension etched into his face. "They'll fall right into our plan," Claire said coldly, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Davis adjusted the helicopter, keeping George in view, while the gorilla thudded closer to the tower, roaring in response to the amplified signal. Ralph leaped alongside George, snarling and snapping at anything that moved, his mutated strength evident in every leap. Lizzie moved through the flooded streets, water surging as she advanced, her massive jaw snapping at obstacles. Davis banked sharply, trying to position himself between George and the tower for control. "Follow me, George," he shouted. The gorilla hesitated for a fraction of a second, recognizing Davis, then resumed his path toward the tower. Ralph followed blindly, and Lizzie surged forward, her focus split between the transmitter's signal and the chaos surrounding her. Claire watched eagerly as the animals closed in, unaware that Davis and Kate had devised a counterplan. Kate held the vials of antidote tightly, ready to reverse the aggressive behavior of the animals. "If we can get it into George, we can calm the others too," she said. Davis nodded, flying low, signaling George to slow down near the industrial district, away from dense civilian zones. George's massive arm smashed through the final barricades as Ralph and Lizzie followed in tandem, causing chaos in the streets below. Davis prepared to jump from the helicopter at the right moment to get close enough to George to deploy the antidote. Kate monitored the city grid, calculating where debris and energy lines posed the most threat. "Timing is everything," she said. The moment came. Davis leaped from the helicopter, swinging onto a massive steel beam. George paused, sniffing the air. Recognizing Davis once more, Davis climbed the beam, reaching the massive gorilla vials in hand. Ralph growled, moving closer, but George held his position, focused on Davis. Lizzie surged through the streets, snapping at anything unfortunate enough to be in her path. Below, Harvey and his team coordinated ground forces to prevent civilian casualties, moving debris and guiding survivors away from danger zones. Claire, confident in her plan, prepared to flee once the animals were contained. "You can't stop what I've started," she told Brett. Davis reached George's massive shoulder, carefully preparing the injection. Ralph lunged at the beam, snarling, but George reacted instinctively, grabbing the wolf by the scruff and holding him in place. Lizzie roared, snapping her jaws, but Davis fired flare grenades to redirect her attention. George remained calm, sensing Davis' intent. As the gorilla's massive fingers wrapped around the vial, Davis administered the antidote, the liquid glowing faintly as it entered George's system. Instantly, the aggression in George's eyes softened, his roar turning into a low, calming growl. Ralph hesitated, confused by George's sudden change in demeanor. Lizzie paused as well, her head tilting, recognizing the shift in the alpha gorilla's behavior. Davis breathed a sigh of relief. Kate quickly prepared additional doses, throwing them near Ralph and Lizzie. Ralph snarled, hesitated, then collapsed to the ground, his enhanced aggression subsiding. Lizzie slowed, water flooding the streets around her as she calmed, the glow in her eyes dimming. Claire, realizing her plan was failing, pulled out a firearm. "You'll regret interfering," she shouted. George roared, a deep, commanding sound, his massive fists shaking the surrounding steel beams. Davis held up a hand, signaling the animals to stand down. Lizzie and Ralph obeyed, now under George's calm influence. The city breathed a collective sigh as chaos began to subside. Davis climbed down from George's massive shoulder, standing beside Kate as the trio of beasts calmed completely. Below, Harvey and his team secured the remaining areas, ensuring no further civilian harm. Claire attempted to flee down the tower stairs, vials of the antidote hidden in her bag. Kate slipped a vial into Claire's bag unnoticed, the antidote ready to neutralize her if she interfered further. George's massive hands grabbed the towering villainess, and with a swift motion, swallowed her whole, along with the antidote vial. Immediately, her aggressive intent dissolved as the antidote took effect. Brett, witnessing his sister's fate, froze in shock. Outside, the debris of the industrial district lay scattered, water from Lizzie's path flooding the streets, and the citizens slowly emerged from hiding. George, Ralph, and Lizzie stood victorious, the calm after the storm settling over Chicago. Davis and Kate embraced briefly, relief washing over them. Harvey radioed in. "All threats neutralized. City is secure." "Well done," George roared one final time, a gentle sound now, signaling his return to normal behavior. The trio of mutated animals now under control, the city slowly began recovery. The Willis Tower, though damaged, remained standing, a testament to the balance between human ingenuity and the strength of nature. Davis, Kate, and Harvey knew the danger wasn't gone forever, but for now, Chicago had survived. The streets of Chicago were eerily quiet after the chaos, a stark contrast to the deafening roars and crashing metal of hours before. Davis, Kate, and Harvey moved cautiously through the industrial district, surveying the damage. Smoke still rose from overturned cars and broken pipelines, while scattered debris littered the flooded streets. George, towering and powerful, walked beside Davis, his massive hands brushing away debris gently, now fully calm. Ralph padded behind, eyes alert but free of aggression, while Lizzie sloshed through shallow water, her massive tail stirring currents that reflected the late afternoon sun. Emergency personnel coordinated the evacuation, helping civilians step over rubble and guiding them to safe zones. "Everyone accounted for?" Davis asked Harvey, scanning the area. "Almost," Harvey replied. "A few stragglers, but we've got medics on it. No major casualties." Surprisingly, Kate exhaled, relief washing over her face. "I can't believe it. George did it. He kept them safe." George let out a low, satisfied grunt, nuzzling Davis lightly in acknowledgement. The three animals, now calm and unthreatening, became the focus of media coverage within hours. Reports highlighted George's heroic actions in preventing further destruction and saving civilians, though the mutated wolf and crocodile were less understood by the public. Davis and Kate coordinated with the authorities to secure a temporary sanctuary for George, Ralph, and Lizzie, ensuring their safety away from the public eye. Meanwhile, Claire Wyde's fate became a cautionary tale. Inside the Willis Tower, Brett discovered his sister incapacitated, her plan foiled, and her influence over the animals nullified by the antidote. Police and federal agents moved quickly to contain the remaining Energene facilities, seizing records, vials, and experimental equipment. Davis and Kate visited George's habitat first, ensuring the gorilla had ample space and resources. He settled comfortably, interacting gently with Ralph and Lizzie, both now acclimating to their new environment. Kate monitored the animals closely, noting the long-term effects of the pathogen, relieved that the aggression had subsided entirely. Meanwhile, city crews began the painstaking process of clearing streets, repairing infrastructure, and restoring utilities. Despite the destruction, the citizens of Chicago slowly returned, inspired by the courage shown by both humans and animals. Davis met with Harvey to discuss long-term containment strategies for the trio of creatures, ensuring that no future incident could escalate to the same scale. "We need to balance safety with freedom for George," Davis said firmly. Harvey nodded. "We'll work on it. Federal oversight will help, but he deserves to live naturally now." Kate prepared detailed reports for federal authorities on the pathogen, its effects, and the potential misuse by enemy. The documentation would serve as the foundation for preventing future bioengineering disasters of this scale. In the meantime, public fascination with George, Ralph, and Lizzie grew. Documentaries, news segments, and social media coverage painted the animals as both heroes and marvels of genetic adaptation. Despite their fame, Davis insisted on maintaining their privacy, limiting public interaction to controlled research and conservation efforts. The city itself bore scars of the chaos, but emergency planning and rapid response had minimized fatalities. Community programs helped survivors rebuild, while urban planners assessed structural integrity and implemented new safety measures. George, Ralph, and Lizzie became symbols of resilience and coexistence between humans and nature, their story inspiring conservation initiatives nationwide. Energene, however, faced severe consequences. Federal investigations revealed years of illegal experiments, manipulation of genetic material, and attempts to weaponize pathogens. Executives, including Brett Wyde, were arrested, tried, and sentenced, while Claire's influence over bioengineering research was permanently terminated. Davis and Kate remained at the forefront of rehabilitation, ensuring that George, Ralph, and Lizzie thrived safely. The trio adapted to their new habitats, with George often assisting in enrichment activities for other animals, demonstrating intelligence and empathy previously unseen. Ralph and Lizzie gradually integrated with environmental monitoring programs, providing invaluable insights into the effects of genetic modifications on wildlife behavior. Meanwhile, Davis and Kate reflected on the journey that had begun with the destruction of Athena-1 and culminated in the survival and recovery of Chicago. "We survived," Kate said softly, watching George interact with Ralph and Lizzie. Davis smiled, wiping sweat and grime from his face. "More than that, we made sure the city, and they, made it too." In the distance, the skyline of Chicago gleamed under the setting sun, a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of cooperation between humans and nature. George roared gently, a sound that resonated not with aggression but with pride, acknowledging the trust and bond he shared with Davis. Ralph nudged him playfully, while Lizzie's tail swished, causing gentle waves in the shallow pools around them. As night fell, the city lights reflected off broken glass and water, painting a mosaic of survival and hope. Emergency crews continued to clear debris, while scientists monitored the animals' vitals and long-term recovery. Davis, Kate, and Harvey knew that vigilance would always be necessary. But for now, the immediate crisis was over. The lessons learned from the pathogen, the destruction, and the animals' heroism would shape policies, research ethics, and conservation strategies for years to come. George, Ralph, and Lizzie, once mutated and dangerous, now represented balance restored. Their intelligence and instincts, a reminder that nature, even when altered, could coexist with humanity. The trio roamed their sanctuary freely, occasionally returning to Davis and Kate for interaction, training, and medical monitoring. News outlets praised the human and animal heroes, emphasizing the importance of ethics in scientific experimentation. The city rebuilt, stronger and more aware of the delicate balance between progress and responsibility. Davis looked over at George one last time before leaving the sanctuary for the evening. The gorilla locked eyes with him, a silent understanding passing between them. They had survived the worst humanity could throw at them, and together, they had prevented catastrophe. Chicago, though scarred, was alive, its citizens wiser, its streets slowly returning to normal, and its skyline shining once more. George, Ralph, and Lizzie remained the city's secret protectors. Quiet heroes in a world that had almost underestimated the strength of nature. And for Davis, Kate, and Harvey, the events of the past days had forged bonds, tested limits, and proven that courage, compassion, and intelligence could overcome even the deadliest of engineered threats. Months had passed since the chaos in Chicago, and the city had slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. Skyscrapers had been repaired, streets cleared, and the scars of destruction now served as reminders of the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Davis stood at the edge of the sanctuary, watching George roam freely across the expansive habitat. The gorilla moved gracefully despite his massive size, interacting gently with Ralph and Lizzie, both now fully accustomed to their controlled environment. Kate approached, holding a clipboard filled with notes on behavioral patterns, genetic monitoring, and recovery progress. "George is adapting faster than I expected," she said, smiling. Davis nodded. "He's not just surviving, he's thriving, and he's teaching us more about nature every day." Harvey joined them, surveying the perimeter of the sanctuary. "Federal oversight will continue, but I think we've struck a balance. They're safe, and so is the public." George paused mid-step, turning his gaze toward Davis, his expressive eyes filled with recognition and trust. Ralph bounded playfully, chasing a ball of rope, while Lizzie splashed in a shallow pond, her massive tail creating waves that lapped against the artificial shoreline. The trio had become an unlikely team, bonded not just by circumstance but by survival and mutual respect. Kate knelt beside George, examining a minor scar from the past battles, which had healed remarkably. "You've been through so much," she whispered, her fingers brushing his fur. "But you're strong." George rumbled in acknowledgement, a sound both soothing and commanding. Meanwhile, the city of Chicago had transformed the narrative of the Rampage into lessons for the future. Conservation programs were implemented, emphasizing the protection of wildlife and the responsible management of genetic research. Energen's influence was entirely dismantled, with strict regulations now governing genetic experiments and bioengineering projects. Public awareness campaigns focused on coexistence with wildlife and the importance of ethical scientific practices. George, Ralph, and Lizzie became symbols of this movement, though their sanctuary remained largely hidden from public view. Researchers and select personnel, including Davis and Kate, were granted controlled access to study the animals, gaining insights into behavior, adaptation, and the effects of rapid genetic mutations. The trio's intelligence and social dynamics amazed even seasoned primatologists and zoologists. George demonstrated problem-solving skills, using tools and interacting with environmental enrichment devices with surprising dexterity. Ralph and Lizzie displayed signs of cooperation, learning to navigate obstacles, and even assisting in minor tasks alongside George. Davis often marveled at their growth, reflecting on the chain of events that had begun with the destruction of Athena 1. The city commemorated the incident with a memorial for first responders and civilians, honoring those who had risked their lives. Davis, Kate, and Harvey attended the ceremony quietly, knowing that the true heroes were hidden away in the sanctuary. George rumbled softly nearby, as if understanding the significance of the moment. Months later, controlled media coverage introduced the public to the existence of these remarkable animals, without exposing them to danger. Documentaries highlighted their intelligence, survival instincts, and the ethical dilemmas surrounding genetic manipulation. Davis and Kate became key advisors on conservation and bioengineering ethics, using their experiences to guide policy decisions. The lessons learned from the Rampage incident influenced legislation worldwide, preventing the misuse of pathogens and genetic technology. George, Ralph, and Lizzie thrived in their sanctuary, their health closely monitored, and their daily routines carefully structured to balance stimulation and safety. Davis often took walks alongside George, communicating through gestures and signs, a bond strengthened by trust and mutual understanding. Ralph and Lizzie followed closely, forming a cohesive group that balanced strength, intelligence, and adaptability. The sanctuary became a model for combining conservation, rehabilitation, and scientific research. Visitors were occasionally allowed in observation areas, witnessing firsthand the resilience of creatures that had once been weapons of destruction. The animals' stories inspired a new generation of scientists, conservationists, and policymakers, emphasizing responsibility alongside discovery. George, now a symbol of hope, occasionally stood on elevated platforms, surveying the habitat, a king in a world that had almost destroyed him. Davis and Kate worked tirelessly to ensure their safety, creating systems to prevent future incidents while allowing the animals autonomy. Chicago itself integrated lessons from the Rampage into urban planning, emergency response, and wildlife protection measures. Communities became more aware of the delicate balance between urban life and natural ecosystems. The trio's legacy extended beyond the city, influencing global discussions on ethics, conservation, and the limits of scientific experimentation. Months turned to years, and George's legend grew quietly within scientific circles. Ralph and Lizzie adapted fully to the sanctuary, their behavior stabilizing under the guidance of Davis and Kate. The animals displayed empathy, intelligence, and social cooperation, becoming living examples of what could be achieved when nature and humanity worked together. Davis often reflected on the events leading from Athena 1's destruction to this sanctuary. Every decision, every risk, had led to this moment of balance, where chaos had been replaced by harmony. The city thrived, the animals thrived, and humans learned to respect the power and intelligence of the creatures they had almost destroyed. George roared one evening, a sound carrying strength, pride, and peace, signaling the end of a long, turbulent chapter. Ralph and Lizzie responded with soft growls, their own expressions of satisfaction and relief. Davis, Kate, and Harvey watched from a distance, their hearts full, knowing that the city, and these extraordinary animals, had survived and would continue to inspire for generations. The sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, reflecting the endurance, intelligence, and compassion that had overcome chaos. George, Ralph, and Lizzie, once weapons of destruction, now champions of survival, coexisted in peace, their story a testament to resilience and hope. The sanctuary was quiet in the early morning, the only sounds being the gentle rustle of leaves and the soft calls of birds. Davis walked along the edge of the gorilla enclosure, watching George carefully stretch and move with a grace that belied his enormous size. Ralph chased a small waterfowl near the pond, occasionally glancing at George as if seeking guidance or approval. Lizzie, now fully accustomed to the environment, waded through the shallow pools, her eyes scanning for any disturbances. Kate joined Davis, holding a tablet filled with updated health records and behavioral observations. "All three are in excellent condition," she said, glancing at George. "Their adaptation continues to exceed expectations." Davis nodded, his eyes following the massive gorilla as he interacted gently with the others. "You know," he said, "we've come a long way from Athena 1, the pathogen, and the chaos in Chicago." Kate smiled, remembering the chain of events that had started with Claire White's reckless ambitions. "Yes," she said, "and yet, somehow, we managed to turn destruction into something productive, something meaningful." George rumbled softly, a sound that conveyed both recognition and reassurance. Ralph trotted over, his head low, brushing against George's side in a gesture of companionship. Lizzie made a small splash in the water, flicking droplets that shimmered in the morning light. The animals had not only survived, they had grown, learned, and bonded. News agencies occasionally published controlled updates on the sanctuary, careful to protect the animals' privacy. George, Ralph, and Lizzie became symbols of resilience and the delicate balance between nature and human intervention. Davis and Kate held regular discussions with federal agencies, providing insights into genetic modification, behavioral adaptation, and ecosystem management. Energen's actions were catastrophic, Harvey said during a briefing, but the lessons learned here are invaluable for the future. Kate nodded. "We need to ensure these protocols are enforced globally. No one should have the power to unleash something like this again." George observed the humans with quiet intelligence, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding of their intentions. Ralph and Lizzie followed him, a cohesive unit that communicated silently, yet effectively, among themselves. Despite their past aggression, the animals now exhibited a remarkable ability to cooperate and coexist peacefully. The city of Chicago continued to recover from the destruction, incorporating lessons on emergency response, urban wildlife management, and disaster preparedness. Citizens became more aware of their environment, learning to respect and protect the wildlife that coexisted with them. Documentaries, educational programs, and controlled interactions with the public taught the importance of ethical science and conservation. Davis often conducted training exercises with George, refining communication and testing cognitive abilities. Ralph and Lizzie participated in these sessions, demonstrating problem-solving skills and cooperative behavior. The sanctuary became a research hub, attracting scientists, conservationists, and ethicists from around the world. Every observation, every experiment, was conducted with care, ensuring that the animals' welfare remained paramount. The trio's fame remained limited to scientific circles, protecting them from sensationalism while sharing invaluable knowledge. George's behavior inspired new understanding of primate intelligence and social dynamics, especially when interacting with other species like Ralph and Lizzie. Ralph's adaptability demonstrated how mammals respond to environmental changes and behavioral conditioning. Lizzie's aquatic skills revealed insights into reptilian adaptation and the effects of genetic modification on predators. The lessons extended beyond biology, influencing psychology, ethics, and even emergency management planning. Years passed, and George, Ralph, and Lizzie thrived in their sanctuary, living full, enriched lives. Davis, Kate, and Harvey maintained close oversight, fostering trust and understanding with the animals. The city, now rebuilt and stronger, occasionally held private ceremonies honoring the unseen heroes of the Rampage. George, Ralph, and Lizzie were never directly acknowledged publicly, preserving their sanctuary's secrecy. Instead, the focus remained on ethical lessons, scientific insights, and conservation success stories. Davis watched George interact with Ralph and Lizzie, marveling at how far they had all come. From chaos to balance, he said softly. Kate smiled, glancing at the animals. And from fear to understanding, Harvey added, it's a model for the future. One we need to replicate responsibly. George let out a soft, contented roar, echoing through the sanctuary. Ralph and Lizzie responded with growls and splashes, completing the silent symphony of life that had been restored. The sky shifted from dawn to full morning, golden light illuminating the sanctuary and casting long shadows that danced across the terrain. Birds flew overhead, and small mammals scurried in the underbrush, a vibrant ecosystem thriving alongside the trio. Davis, Kate, and Harvey took a moment to absorb the peace, knowing that vigilance would always be required. But for now, humanity and nature had found an equilibrium, fragile yet promising. George raised a massive hand toward Davis, as if acknowledging the bond and shared journey they had endured. Ralph nudged George playfully, and Lizzie twirled in the water, her movements graceful despite her size. The sanctuary had become more than a refuge. It was a symbol of resilience, intelligence, and hope. Every visitor, every researcher, and every scientist who learned of the sanctuary carried with them lessons that could prevent future catastrophes. Davis reflected on the journey from Athena 1 to Chicago's destruction, the battles with the mutated animals, and the final restoration of balance. We did it, he whispered to Kate. We turned tragedy into something meaningful. Kate nodded, her eyes filled with pride and gratitude. George roared gently once more, a sound that resonated with strength, wisdom, and peace. Ralph barked softly, and Lizzie's tail swished in a gentle rhythm. All three creatures unified in harmony. The sun climbed higher, illuminating the sanctuary in a warm glow that promised safety, growth, and a future defined by understanding rather than fear. Chicago thrived, the sanctuary flourished, and George, Ralph, and Lizzie became enduring symbols of what could be achieved when courage, compassion, and intelligence guided human actions. And so, the story concluded not with destruction, but with recovery, coexistence, and the enduring legacy of three extraordinary creatures and the humans who stood by them.